This is a session on maximizing agricultural productivity to feed Africa in and beyond the imminent food crisis, the lessons at hand. We will switch around the conversation a little bit and start off with a perspective from the bank, as this evaluation really is going to be leading into the bank's upcoming 10-year strategy, which will really be focusing on building a business-oriented and commercially viable agricultural sector that creates jobs and livelihoods and can feed Africa and can ensure that Africa plays its rightful role as the world's breadbasket. We recognize that this imperative must be achieved within the context of the range of vulnerabilities that our agricultural value chains face, which includes impacts of regional and global conflict on supply chains and commodity prices, as you've seen with the Ukraine crisis, as well as droughts, floods, and pests that are increasing in frequency as the impacts of climate change become clear. So given that Africa's food systems and the state of Africa's food systems and their vulnerability, I think our main order of business in this session is to draw the lessons, discuss the lessons that we can draw from the experiences and practices to maximize agricultural productivity, to feed Africa now and in the future sustainably and with resilience building. And so with that, please allow me to introduce, to make the first remarks, Dr. Martin Fregene, the Director of Agriculture and Agro-Industry at the African Development Bank. Dr. Fregene is a plant geneticist and molecular breeder with 25 years of experience in genetics and the breeding of cassava. Martin has developed the first molecular genetic map of cassava and started the first cassava molecular breeding program to accelerate the development of improved cassava varieties for various agroecologies of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. He began his career as a cassava breeder at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture in Ibadan, Nigeria. He has a PhD in plant genetics and breeding, and is also from the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. Martin, you're very welcome. Thanks for kicking us off, and please, over to you.
The theme of the 2022 Evaluation Week couldn't have been more appropriate, given the current situation, the food crisis that the world is facing. Africa, in particular, has been convulsed by three major crises. The first one, which we all know, is COVID-19. The second one also begins with the C, is the climate change and the ravages of climate change. And the last one is the crisis of the war in Ukraine. These three C's have made a difficult situation for Africa even more precarious. Before COVID, about 256 million Africans, or 20% of the population, were already undernourished, and about 30% of the children were stunted. But with the three C's, COVID-19, the crisis in Ukraine, and also the climate change impacts, the droughts in the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, we have another 49 million Africans who have slipped into hunger and food insecurity. We at the African Development Bank consider this as a very important challenge. Why? For several reasons. One, we all know that you are what you eat. Nutrition is so important, especially for children. The first 1,000 days of a child's life are probably the most important in a child's life. And the bank invests a lot in infrastructure, physical infrastructure, but there's also the gray matter infrastructure. That's the ability of a child to live up to his potential, through his brain. And if that is undermined by poor nutrition in the first 1,000 days, that child is compromised. And when you have stunted children, you have stunted economies. But also from the point of view of the household income, Africa imports so much food because of declining per capita food income. And when you import food, you put pressure on your currency. And households that often, already spend up to 80% of their income on food, once the price of food goes up internationally, and with a weakening currency, they actually have to even spend even more So what has the bank been doing? I will just share very quickly with you two things the bank has been doing. One that is more long-term, medium to long-term, and the other one that has been more immediate. The first one is what we call the bank's Feed Africa strategy, which is also the second corporate priority of the African Development Bank. Here, launched in 2016, the bank is using the Feed Africa strategy to actually reverse the declining per capita food production on the continent. And how are we doing it? Three major ways. One is by boosting productivity. Very, very important. Secondly is by putting in place the infrastructure, both hard and soft infrastructure required to actually get food from the farm to the table. Rural roads, storage, and processing, zones, and also the soft infrastructure, the digital agriculture, advisory services, to make production even more efficient. And third, and perhaps and the most important, is financing. And you'll hear more of that from colleagues in Andrew's department. But I would like to speak very quickly about the Feed Africa strategy, and then I will go into a more immediate intervention the bank is doing, which is what we call the Africa Emergency Food Production Facility. So on the Feed Africa has some very ambitious targets. Is to reach 40 million farmers with the best technologies by 2025, and add an additional 120 million metric tons of food to the continent's food supply. And also Feed Africa, seeks to also build SMEs, 250,000 SMEs run by young people and women by 2025. But for today, I will only limit myself to the productivity part of Feed Africa. And in 2018, the bank launched what we call Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation. We saw that productivity on the continent was about a third of global averages. That is really small. If you think about it, it means that Africa's food supply is not competitive compared to imported alternatives. And so the bank launched the Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation in 2018 to put in the hands of farmers, 40 million farmers, the best climate-adapted wheat, maize, rice, sorghum, cassava varieties, and to increase their productivity and thereby increasing their food production. How do we go about this? Three things. First and foremost, the early generation seed system. When a variety is produced, there's only a few hundred kilograms of seed at the beginning. Usually seed companies or government extensions systems actually have to bulk that seed to a point when it's tens of thousands of tons of certified seed that can be given to farmers. Weak national agricultural research systems and also the hesitance of private sector companies to get involved in that process has meant that many of the best varieties, climate adapted varieties, are not available to our farmers. So what did the bank do? The bank actually came in through TAC, working with the national programs, working with the seed companies, supporting them to actually bulk. And I'll talk more about that later on. Secondly, the policy environment. We all know that if you are going to have private sector invest, the regulatory environment must be just right. So what we have done is actually work with countries to put in place seed policy laws and also to harmonize national laws compared to regional laws so you can move things across the region. Very, very important, the policy environment. So that has really worked with the countries to assess the seed policies in different parts of the continent and also ensure it's actually adequate for private sector investment. And then lastly, and perhaps more importantly, demonstration and extension. For these new varieties, many farmers don't actually know them. Someone has to demonstrate it to them. And so TAT has organized tens of thousands of demonstration trials all across the continent, showing farmers what the new varieties can do compared to their traditional varieties. And then, of course, extension, once farmers adopt it, showing them how to use those varieties. So those three things TAT has done. And I'll just use 2 or 3 examples to show the success of TAT. TAT has been widely successful. For example, heat-tolerant wheat varieties that can expand wheat production in many countries from the cold highlands to the very hot but arid lowlands. So when you have irrigation in lowlands, you can actually use these varieties to produce wheat. And Ethiopia has just done that. From 5,000 hectares of irrigated lowland wheat in 2018, 2017, today, Ethiopia, using these heat-tolerant wheat varieties that TAT was very much involved in helping to bulk up the seeds, Ethiopia has gone to 650,000 hectares of heat-tolerant varieties in the lowlands, the Awash River Valley and other parts of the country. Ethiopia this year did not import wheat for the very first time in living memory. Ethiopia did not import wheat because TAT intervened with the government, with the seed companies, and bulked heat-tolerant variety that was introduced earlier under another bank project in Ethiopia. The same thing with Sudan, same thing also in maize in Southern Africa, can also in Kenya. TAT has worked with more than 28 seed companies to bulk seeds of climate-adapted maize varieties and distributed them to more than 1 million farmers in these countries, and also to raise productivity of maize in this country. This is just two very quick stories, but there are many others in cassava, in rice, in sorghum. I would believe that as TAT has helped Ethiopia to become self-sufficient in wheat production, we can do the same thing for Sierra Leone in rice. We're going to do the same thing for maize in Kenya. We can do the same thing for sorghum in the Sahel. And that is why we believe very strongly that TAT and the Bank Feed Africa project is actually helping the country, helping the continent to eventually feed itself. I'll go very quickly now to the last item I was going to talk about, was what the bank is doing immediately in response to the war in Ukraine that has led to a loss of food supply. I was actually surprised that Africa imports up to 30 million tons of wheat and maize from Ukraine and Russia. And when the war started, that 30 million tons of wheat and maize was no longer coming. Now that's a huge amount of food that has been lost. But even to compound things, the price of fertilizer became so high. And I was surprised to realize that Africa imports about 20% of its fertilizer, especially the blended fertilizer, from Russia, and another maybe 10% or so from Belarus. A lot of fertilizer. And then if you also add the nutrients, potash, you actually realize that Africa is importing probably close to 50% of all its nutrients from from those countries. Again, that fertilizer was not going to come, and it meant lower production of food, lower yields. And so the country was actually faced with a huge drop in food supply. The bank very quickly responded, and on the 20th of May, the bank's board approved the $1.5 billion facility called the African Emergency Food Production Facility. The facility has three key pillars. The first thing was to make seeds and fertilizer available and affordable to smallholder farmers. Secondly, was to increase the supply of fertilizer into the country. And then thirdly, the policy reforms to make input distribution more market-based. So we don't have to always do an emergency facility, but make Africa more a market-led input distribution system. So what has happened so far? Once the board approved in the facility on the 20th of May, within a total of 45 days, 24 operations, country operations, were approved, totaling about $1.1 billion. And these operations were to essentially help the countries, provide smart subsidies to farmers to reduce the price of fertilizer and also reduce the price of seeds. And then also working with our Africa Fertilizer Financing Mechanism, help to provide financing to large traders to bring in more fertilizer into the countries. And of course, lastly, the policy reforms. I'm pleased to inform you that today more than 22 of those approved loans have been signed by government, and about 11 of them are being disbursed. We also have missions that have gone to the countries, working with the countries on who are the target beneficiaries, how much, what's the source of the seed and fertilizer, and then what is the deployment method. We have adopted ICT, platforms, to deploy the seed and fertilizer, the subsidies for seed and fertilizer, because it's transparent and also it's also inclusive. Both men and young people can be included. But that's not the end. We will still have another 12 operations in the works to bring it to a total of 36 countries that that benefit from this. And also we have reached out to other partners to look for additional resources, to provide resources also to other countries that cannot borrow, or that they right now don't have headroom to be able to receive money. Like I said, AfDB is an immediate intervention just to raise local food production. The total expected amount of food to be produced is 38 million tons. And then we believe that this will make up for the lost food coming from Russia and Ukraine. Anyway, in just concluding, what TAT and AfDB has shown us is that if you put the right tools in the hands of African farmers, they can feed their nations. They can even go beyond feeding their nation. They can actually export to other food deficient parts of the world. But farmers need the right seed, they need the right fertilizer, they need the right extension, and they need the right financing. I want to thank you again for listening to me, and I'm sorry if I've taken a little bit more time. Thank you, and back to you, Andrew. Yeah.
I hope, Martin, also colleagues. Martin, you mentioned that the African Emergency Food Production Facility, just within a couple of months to respond very quickly to emergency, almost 36 operations with 12 more to come. So we know you have a lot of your hands, and because of that, you might need to leave a bit sooner than you would have liked to. So colleagues, and Martin, if you don't mind, if I could just ask some quick questions to follow up, because you mentioned the kind of more systematic long-term efforts that are being conducted under Feed Africa with the TAT program. A lot of impressive results coming through, but then of course the pivot that must be done to deal with these emergencies. In the context of an increasingly fragile system with climate change and a range of shocks expected, how do you balance between these more systematic investments and the need to respond to emergencies that arise?
Well, thank you, Andrew. That's a very good question. As a matter of fact, we should look to more stable, more robust, systems that can absorb shocks. So we should look to a more resilient, Africa agricultural sector. We should look to a sector that is market led, that doesn't have to always require donor or development partner interventions. And to achieve that, Andrew, we need to put in place some very important things. I will just very quickly run through 5 things. The very first thing is you need to put in place an enabling environment. The sector must be properly regulated. And the second thing you want to put in place the technologies, extremely important. The third thing you want to put in place financing. Without financing, it's difficult for the private sector to actually invest in new technologies. And then also, it is important the market. So we have to make sure the market's organized, and that's where the special agro processing zones that they are working in the government is so important. The infrastructure for the market to offtake this produce. You cannot eat rice with without being processed. So for that to happen is extremely important. And then lastly, and perhaps more importantly, is also the partnerships between the private sector and the government, the private sector. So all that is required to make African sector, more modern, more transformed, and also able to, as we said, the shocks. One of the things Andrew, is the weather advisory services and the crop insurance. It is all part of the package of financing, to help farmers to at least withstand changes that are not anticipated, particularly due to climate change. But I believe very strongly that the bank is on the right path. We will probably help the continent, get to the point where we don't have to do these short-term, emergencies. Yeah. Back to you, Andrew.
allow me a follow-up. As you talked, among the 5 things you mentioned, you talked of, the enabling environment and policy, and you also talked of technologies. And earlier you had mentioned the great success of the case of Ethiopia with the drought-tolerant wheat, in which Ethiopia now no longer imports wheat. So from the perspective of a policy environment where as you had mentioned, one key input or target for the TAT program was to ensure a policy environment in which there was a standardization of seed policy and they could be traded easily across borders. Can you speak to maybe the role that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement might be able to play in that respect?
Yeah, that's a really good point. A question, Andrew. You see, the continental free trade is going to be so important because we all know that Africa has what we call bread baskets. Uganda is a bread basket, Tanzania is a bread basket, Cameroon is a bread basket. Food is produced in those areas, but has to be consumed elsewhere. And beyond bread basket, we also know we also have input baskets. For example, Zambia is the largest producer of seeds on the continent. Very, very important sources of seeds for the rest of the continent. But the borders are always a big problem. The time, I'm sure you must have seen during COVID-19, the long lines of trucks waiting to cross the borders. Huge problem. And I'm happy that the bank is working very closely with the African Union, to through the free trade zone, make those border crossings more easier, digitize them so the paperwork and all the non-toll barriers, are removed. It's going to be extremely important if we're going to succeed that countries also adopt policies that don't ban trade, because they actually, distort prices. So the free trade zone is going to be one of the, for me, perhaps maybe one of the biggest interventions to strengthen African agriculture, because when you have free trade, then you have competitive, advantages being developed. People that can produce more because it's a good market and it's a free flow of goods and people. They can now, take advantage of that and actually improve their, and then they will bring down the cost of production, they bring down the cost of food for everybody. So I think it's going to be, this one probably going to be one maybe biggest interventions that Africa needs is a free flow of food and inputs and people across the borders that will ensure that markets are increased and also ensure comparative advantage is leveraged. Yeah. Thank you. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Martin. And maybe just finally, before I let you go, in case you will have to leave, let me also allow a question from the floor to encourage others to keep asking questions as the session goes on. The first one I see here is a French question, so I hope I can translate it effectively. But Martin, the question here is how can we explain to Africans, this more general question, how can we explain to Africans that we have the most fertile land in the world, and yet we import large quantities of wheat and other crops, as you have suggested?
No, Andrew, let me use a story to explain that, to respond to that question. It's a story that was told to me by Ethiopian farmer. Yeah, we went to the Awash Valley, earlier this year in February, and we saw the beautiful wheat of fields of wheat. So we asked the farmer, how is it that you are growing so much wheat? What were you growing before? And the farmer said, we're growing vegetables. And we said, so why did you switch from vegetables to wheat? And the farmer smiled. I've never met a farmer who cannot count. Farmers can count money. The farmer said, when I grow wheat, I make an average of $6,000 a hectare because there's a market and because I use the best technologies and I get very high yields. But when I grow vegetables, sometimes I make up to 3,000, sometimes I make nothing because there's just a glutton market. So the reason why Africa is not able to feed itself is simply because farmers don't have access to the best technologies and they don't have access into market. If they have both, be rest assured what happened in Ethiopia when it becomes self-sufficient, will happen all across the continent. That's why the bank is really working so hard to put into their hands the best technologies and also working so hard to put into access to farmers, infrastructure, roads, storage, and processes so that the farmer can actually have a secured market. When you have those things in place, it's not rocket science. It's been done all across the continent, first of all in Europe, and then in the US, and then eventually in Asia and Latin America, and that's going to happen in Africa. It's going to be the trio of number one, good technologies to raise productivity and make agriculture profitable to the farmer. Number two, access to market, right from the roads, the storage, everything, the market standards, the market infrastructure, cleaning, drying, and then lastly, perhaps, and the most important, the finance to make all this happen. Thank you very much, Andrew.
That's a great way to segue to the next conversation. And so for that, allow me to introduce our next speaker, our keynote speaker, Dr. Babafemi Oyewole, who is the CEO of the Pan-African Farmers Organization. Dr. Oyewole has extensive experience with public, private, and non-governmental sectors across Africa. He has served as the CEO for the African Agribusiness Alliance in Ghana, as well as the CEO for Africa's Petroleum Producers Organization and for Technical Corporation in Benin. He obtained his PhD in Development Economics at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom, and has published widely across international journals and is a regular speaker at international conferences, seminars, and workshops. Dr. Babafemi, it's a pleasure to have you with us. You're welcome.
I'm speaking on boosting smallholder farmers' productivity to feed Africa against the looming food crisis. The challenge of feeding the ever-increasing African population has made it imperative to support the smallholder farmers and boost their productivity. This has become more compelling given the recent developments in the global food system that may adversely affect food production in Africa. Boosting smallholder farmers' productivity is particularly relevant in the current context of rising food prices and concerned about food nutrition security following the Russia and Ukrainian war. The crisis has significantly led to increase in the price of food, especially wheat, maize, and soybeans that are imported from these countries. Moreover, the price of fertilizers, an important input in the production of farm products, have skyrocketed by over 300% due to the crisis, which will further reduce the level of productivity by the smallholder farmers in the coming years if urgent measures are not implemented to address the problems. Despite their role and importance to household food security, the productivity of small farmers is quite low, and as a result, poverty among African smallholder farmers is very high. So addressing the challenges faced by these smallholder farmers and improving their productivity has the potential to help in reducing the impact of the looming food crisis on foods and nutrition security in the continent. I want to talk on the productivity of smallholder farmers in Africa. The important characteristics of smallholder farming systems in sub-Saharan Africa exhibit a high degree of heterogeneity, livelihood strategies, population pressures, access to markets, institutions, and agroecological conditions. Some common characteristics across these systems can be identified. The use of agrochemical in sub-Saharan Africa is the lowest of any region in the world. For example, the average farmer outside sub-Saharan Africa applying nearly 15 times more fertilizer per hectare than the average African farmer. As a result, yields of both cereals and tuber crops are low in comparison to the rest of the world. For instance, the average maize yield in sub-Saharan Africa is only 50% of the average yield in all developing countries and 20% of average yield for developed countries. So limitations to increase productivity of smallholder farmers in Africa include unreliable and/or poorly distributed rainfall, low and attractive prices, lack of small-scale irrigation facilities, insufficient selection of suitable crop varieties, especially for the marginal areas, pest and disease problems, large post-harvest losses, poor research extension leakages, poor supply of inputs, especially seed and fertilizers in fertile soils, and failure of the smallholder farmer to adapt to changing environments and adopt new technologies. So smallholder farmers in most of African countries still produce in agricultural systems characterized by low input and low outputs. Low yield is the most critical factor affecting profitability and competitiveness of smallholder farmers. Furthermore, many smallholder farmers are unprepared to meet the complex demands of agricultural business. Many lack the skills and resources required to engage in commercial agriculture. Over 80% of smallholder farmers still produce at the subsistence level. The low productivity of the smallholder farmers in Africa exert a high human and economic cost. High rates of poverty prevail, especially in major agroecological zones. It also makes African agriculture an competitive sector. Around a third of all calories consumed in Africa are imported, resulting in a negative net agricultural trade balance. Africa imports food staples valued at about $25 billion annually, essentially because food production, supply, and consumption systems are not functioning optimally. The level of value addition and crop processing of agricultural commodities is low, and post-harvest losses in sub-Saharan Africa average 30% of total production, meaning that the region loses over $4 billion each year. Agribusiness activities outside of farming account for 78% of total value added in all agricultural value chains globally. Yet, this figure falls to approximately 38% in Africa. What are the challenges of increasing smallholder farmers' productivity in Africa? Some of these challenges have been mentioned by my predecessor, Dr. Frugene, which includes climate change, access to finance, poor infrastructure and road network, and storage and marketing facilities, lack of competitiveness, low technology and innovation adoption rate. These are the issues. We know that climate change is a reality, and this is manifesting itself through the following hazards: high temperature, droughts, bushfires, floods, soil salinity, and shifts in onset and end of the rainy season. And these have negative impact on crop and livestock yields and production, food security, and the livelihoods of farmers. For years, climate change has been significantly reducing agricultural productivity in the African continent, and thus aggravating its challenges with food security for a rapidly growing population. Climate change repercussions are direct not only on production, but on key aspects of the physical environment. These changing climatic conditions require farmers not only to adapt to production, but also for land tenure and land use. Poor management of which can lead to full-blown conflicts, creating further destabilization of farmers. Thus, farmers need to develop resilience and adaptations to climate variability and shocks, such as irregular rainfall, floods, storms, droughts, in order to increase their productivity. Africa needs to develop and implement sustainable agroecological-based approaches to food production that improve soil fertility and ensure efficient land and water use while adapting to climate change and protecting biodiversity. Climate-smart agriculture has the potential of fulfilling this need in the continent. Access to finance, which Dr. Frugene has rightly mentioned, is also a challenge. And because of the fact that small older farmers, most of them are poor, and the access to finance is always very difficult for them. and the financial capital of cash is extremely limited. And such, these farmers are unable to make significant investment to improve production on their farms. This factor makes it difficult for smallholder farmers to obtain capital they need to buy fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and improve seed to increase their productivity. The poor infrastructure is well known. Lack of access to good infrastructure limits the ability of a farmer to transport inputs, produce, and to access information. Most smallholder farmers lack storage and processing facilities and struggle to distribute and market their products, resulting in high post-harvest losses, as I mentioned earlier. So this leads to inconsistency in production and supply capacity, and coupled with lack of bargaining power from poor access to market information. These smallholder farmers often sell their products at lower profit margins. In some situations, smallholder farmers receive even less for their products by selling them at the farm gates. Lack of competitiveness, but Dr. Fregene has also mentioned that, and they are not small older farmers are not competitive internationally, and that is why the prices of imported food products are always lower than the one that is produced on the continent. Those who have the capacity to sell internationally must be able to export products that meet minimum standard required by importing countries or enterprises, and should be price competitive in international market. Without the assistance of private public sector and donor agencies, it is somehow difficult for smallholders to access international markets in developed countries. Low technology and innovation adoption, the adoption rate. Most smallholder farmers in Africa are still using traditional tools and equipment in their farming activities, thus responsible for their low productivity. The adoption rate of modern technology is growing, but it's very slow among the farmers, despite the effort of public policies and the support of international development partners to raise awareness and adopt modern technologies. Unless modern technologies adoption rate is significantly improved, the productivity rate of smallholder farmers will not meet the expectations of adequately feeding the growing population of the continent. Let's look at the policy measures for improving the productivity of smallholder farmers. African leaders over time has always manifested their commitment to increase public investment in agriculture and ensure agriculture-led economic growth and development for the eradication of poverty and food insecurity, which offer immense opportunities for improving the productivity of smallholder farmers in Africa. We know the various initiatives, the Maputo Declaration in 2003, the Malabo Declaration in 2014, the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, and all other programs that has been initiated to improve finance to the agricultural sector, and also thereby improving the condition of the smallholder farmers. Well, what are if you look at these declarations and the frameworks, what are the expectations of this for the smallholder farmers? In all these declarations and frameworks, there are manifest commitments towards improving the productivity of smallholder farmers. For example, the 2003 Maputo Declaration set out plans for intervention that will enhance the productivity of smallholder farmers. Specifically, the position of the smallholder in the African development agenda is implicit in the commitments to, number one, ending hunger by 2025, doubling agricultural productivity, reducing post-harvest losses by 50%, increasing consumption of local food, and improving nutritional status. Number two, having poverty by 2025, sustaining greater or equal to 6% annual GDP growth, boosting public-private partnership with smallholder involvement in priority agricultural commodity value chains, creating job opportunity for at least 30% of youth in agriculture. Increasing, number three, increasing market access and trade opportunities at local, regional, and international levels. Increasing, number 4, the resilience of agricultural production systems to climate change and other shocks. Number 5, accountability, monitoring progress towards achieving the targeted objectives. The declaration of the specific position and role of the smallholder farmer should be indicated in the national agricultural development plans. So the African Development Bank also has undertaken various initiatives, as mentioned by Dr. Fregene, the strategy for agricultural transformation and the IDEV agenda, the Feed Africa strategy, which have 4 specific goals: contribute to eliminating extreme poverty in Africa by 2025, end hunger and malnutrition in Africa by 2025, make Africa a net food exporter, and move Africa to the top of the export-oriented value chains, where it has competitive advantage. Also, Dr. Fregene mentioned the emergency food production facility that is making available $1.5 billion to farmers all over the continent. These are the initiatives that is expected to boost the productivity of farmers and the smallholder farmers to produce more and increase their productivity. So another thing that I want to highlight is sustainable strategies to boost productivity of smallholder farmers. What can be done to boost agricultural productivity, particularly smallholder farmers? We have these 8 factors that I drew from transforming Africa's agriculture to improve competitiveness by analysis by the African Development Bank. Number 1 is to develop high-yield crops through research into plant breeding, which consider the unique soil types of Africa and make production and productivity to increase. And number 2 is to boost irrigation, particularly small-scale irrigation that will be affordable to the smallholder farmers. Number 3 is to increase the use of fertilizers in Africa. Fertilizer education also is very important to lessen the environmental impact of the use of fertilizer. Improve market access, regulations and governance, which is well known, make better use of information technology, and adopt genetically modified crops. We need to reform land ownership with productivity and inclusive objectives, particularly to the women and the youth segment of the agricultural sector, and facilitating the integration of the value chains, which will facilitate also interregional trade among the farmers. What is the role of farmers' organization? We know that all over the world, farmers' organization plays a fundamental role in supporting and delivering important services to the farmers who are the members. And so these organizations, they provide the institutional support towards the implementation of government and donor-assisted programs, such as managing partnership, facilitating mobilization of resources, and collective marketing. They also empower their members at the local and regional level by engaging with policy and service providers to create higher structures and build their capabilities. For us as a Pan-African Farmers Organization, with the membership of 80 million farmers across Africa, we have a fundamental coordinating role, both with our members, networks, and with continental and international organizations. So we have a convening power and ability to facilitate dialogue and cooperation with the various continental and international institutions, as well as with financial and technical partners. And to effectively play these roles, farmers' organizations' capacity should be strengthened to develop their capability, and policy analysis and advocacy, lobbying and articulation of farmers' position on agricultural policies and development of strategies that favor their members. So they need the capacity to mobilize resources, develop access to market and technological innovation that will enable farmers to actively participate in the agricultural value chain and overcome the challenges of climate change and supply chain constraints. Furthermore, for farmers' organizations to be sustainable in the current market-oriented and global economy, they must develop an effective management system with a clear idea of identifying opportunities and implementing the projects and programs that will meet the needs of their members. In conclusion, the productivity of small farmers in Africa is very low and cannot support the rapidly increasing food requirements of its growing population against the looming food crisis. In recognition of the importance of agriculture and the role of smallholder farmers, various policies and initiatives have been developed at national, regional, and international institutions and levels to address the challenges. Some of these initiatives are like the Malabo declaration that I mentioned above, have been implemented, but they have not yielded in the intended objective. If not, we will not be where we are today. So in conclusion, the looming food crisis will no doubt threaten food and nutrition security in Africa if urgent policies are not implemented to address the challenges being faced by smallholder farmers. At the African Green Revolution Forum held in Kigali, Rwanda, in early September 2022, experts warned that the cost of Africa's yearly food imports could rise from US $50 billion to $110 billion by 2030 if immediate measures are not taken to increase food production. And that Africa required an annual investment of around $40 billion to $70 billion from public sector and $80 billion from the private sector to support food production in Africa to avert the adverse consequences of the looming food crisis. Hopefully, all stakeholders in the agricultural sector will collaborate and commit to supporting smallholder farmers to boost their productivity and increase food production to feed the growing population of Africa. As noted by Dr. Usman Badiem, CEO of Academia 2063, when given the right options and incentives, farmers can drive sustainable agricultural development, which is again what Dr. Pergene has highlighted, that if farmers have the right tools, they can feed the population. Thank you for the opportunity.
I will ask our next speaker to come on board and give her remarks with respect the conversation that we've had, and really around trying to think through, given the stage that has been set by yourself, Dr. Babafemi, and of course Dr. Martin Fregene earlier, what incentives there are for increasing food production in Africa. So with that, colleagues, our next panelist is Andrea Cook, who joined the World Food Production in 2017 as the Director of Evaluation, providing leadership for evaluation function globally within the World Food Programme's headquarters in Rome. Previously, she was Director of Evaluation at the United Nations Population Fund. And prior to that, Andrea worked for over 20 years in international development, primarily with the Department for International Development of the United Kingdom, South and Southeast Asia, East and Southern Africa, and in the Caribbean and Eastern Europe. So a broad geographical experience. She's also been co-chair of the Eval Partners and the vice chair of the United Nations Evaluation Group from 2015 and to 2017. So a great perspective from the point of view of this evaluation week. Andrea, it's a pleasure to have you. The floor is yours to set the scene for the conversation coming up. Thank you.
I've really been asked to bring the perspective of what we're learning from the evidence generated from the World Food Programme evaluations around this topic about increasing agricultural productivity in Africa, and particularly at a time of global shocks. So firstly, the World Food Programme, based in Rome, is the United Nations agency with a core mandate to support governments in achieving SDG 2, either through direct humanitarian interventions, through distributions of humanitarian assistance, or through strengthening local capacities and resources. For example, through the support to smallholder farmers and associations, or supporting communities to build productive assets. The World Food Programme works in many different contexts in Africa, ranging from conflict and post-conflict settings such as northern Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, or South Sudan, to places at risk of climate change, often arid or semi-arid zones in countries like Mali, Niger, Ethiopia, or Kenya. And in addition, in more stable contexts, WFP often provides support directly through government structures and national programs through capacity strengthening support. Since 2016, the World Food Programme has significantly invested in developing the evaluation function, which includes centrally managed evaluations from my office, decentralized evaluations, which are managed by country officers or regional bureaus, and impact evaluations. These come together to meet the growing needs for accountability and learning across WFP and with our partners. Over the past 5 years, WFP has commissioned 16 centralized evaluations, mainly country program evaluations, 82 decentralized evaluations, and 18 impact evaluations in Africa alone. All WFP evaluations, importantly, aim to answer very practical, pragmatic questions, looking at the relevance, the effectiveness, the efficiency and sustainability of interventions, but all of them do so with a lens which is trying to understand the gender impacts of WFP policies, programs and interventions, which is very important when we're looking at the topic of agricultural production in Africa, where women make such a significant part of the farmers across the continent. So from this very large and diverse body of evidence, it's very clear that the interventions of the World Food Programme, when done right, can have a significant and positive impact on local market actors and can incentivize higher agricultural production. And I'd like to explain this a little bit more through 3 main points. Firstly, WFP evaluations have shown that WFP's large-scale food assistance programs can boost local and regional food production, as well as the entire food value chain. At the regional level, a recent evaluation of WFP supply chain outcomes on food systems in East Africa found that the continuous increase in regional and local procurement by WFP to respond to various humanitarian crises in the region has created a significant demand that allows producers and other market actors to grow in the region. Also, the volumes of commodities shipped by WFP along certain supply routes make it financially justified for WFP to invest in local infrastructure, such as roads and bridges, which in turn create positive externalities for local market actors and incentivize local production for trade. An example of such investments are the feeder routes that WFP has built in South Sudan to facilitate access to remote towns and communities. At the local level, as shown by a recent country strategic plan evaluation in Tanzania, where WFP provides a lifeline for refugees and other vulnerable people, local procurement is giving participating farmers an incentive to produce more, as there is a predictable purchaser of excess production. And as shown by several local economy-wide impact evaluations, or LUIs, such as the one conducted in Rwanda by WFP in 2015, the increasing use of cash transfers instead of in-kind food distributions are also seen to support local market actors and their suppliers, as they are adapting to increase local demand for agricultural products and food. And we see that each dollar injected into the local market through a direct cash transfer creates a multiple effect on the local economy in diverse ways. Secondly, our evaluations have shown evidence that WFP can develop agricultural markets and boost production through supporting social protection programs, which include a local value chain component. The market incentives provided by social protection systems are usually much more stable and sustainable than those provided by local purchasers to respond to emergencies. For example, evaluations in Chad and Kenya have shown that homegrown school meals programs can create a stable local demand for nutritious food items, thereby increasing local production. The injection of cash into the local economy through the schools can thus be considered an important demand-side investment into local production. An evaluation in Ghana has shown evidence on how entire value chains can be set up for local production of specialized nutritious foods, such as corn-soy blend, which is used to prevent and treat malnutrition, with the National Malnutrition Prevention Programme being the main buyer of these products. In Rwanda, an ongoing impact evaluation examines how providing cash-based transfers to women who work outside the home increases their power over household decisions and builds their resilience to shocks and stresses. And the third point I would like to highlight is that evaluations have shown that it's often necessary for WFP to provide direct support to smallholder agricultural production and value chains to ensure a reliable supply, both in terms of quantity and quality of humanitarian food support, and to also strengthen livelihoods and resilience in a more sustainable manner. In this, our evaluations show that WFP has achieved the greatest reach by collaborating with other partners. For instance, in DRC, WFP worked with FAO in a joint resilience program since 2009, firstly in Tanganyika and Equator provinces, and later expanding to the Kivus and Ubangi. They supported farmer organizations, combining nutrition-sensitive functional literacy programs with support to agricultural production. WFP purchases commodities directly from these farmer organizations for its homegrown school feeding program. And in parallel, through its food assistance for assets activities, WFP has also supported the rehabilitation and construction of agricultural feeder roads, warehouses, and market infrastructure, employing local labor and addressing immediate food security needs, as well as strengthening local agricultural production and markets. This was a strategic partnership with a clear division of tasks between FAO and WFP at the national level. And this partnership has since expanded since 2020 to include UNICEF in North and South Kivu. An evaluation of WFP's contribution to market systems in Southern Africa has shown that when developing food systems, it's important to involve all stakeholders in the value chain: retailers, traders, aggregation systems, local government, and smallholders right at the outset, rather than to focus on supporting a specific group. A successful program would include interventions both at the supply and the demand side, and this calls for better joint planning and the development of operational partnerships from the outset. And finally, some of our impact evaluations, for instance, in Mali, Niger, and with UNICEF in South Sudan, are looking at the impact of conditional cash transfers during the lean season on the resilience of agricultural households over time. And they're specifically looking at an important dimension of resilience and exploring to what extent cash transfers help smallholder farmers avoid the divesting of their productive assets during shocks such as droughts, enabling them to rebound more easily after shocks and maintain their agricultural production potential. So I hope that from the perspective of a humanitarian organization, I've provided some insights onto the rich seam of evidence that helps Africa understand what works and why to contribute to effective scale-up and replication, even in challenging times. Thank you for your attention.
Dr. Babafemi, this is to you as you sit at the apex of this Pan-African Farmers Organization, and given, of course, the critical role that farmers play, and the role of the voice of the organization. Given the challenges that you have highlighted, what would you say is really the top three, for example, success cases that we can speak to where farmers organizations have really been transforming or boosting significantly their agricultural productivity? What has led to those?
That's a very important question that you have asked. First of all, I want to really highlight the fact that up to very recent times, farmers organizations are not well organized in Africa. And actually, they were operating as an informal entities. But with the creation of the Pan-African Farmers Organization, that now led to the creation of 5 regional members: the North African, the East African, the South African, the Central African, and the West African memberships, who are now grouped together as regional organizations to support the national organizations and the local organizations. So many initiatives have been undertaken by the regional organizations in support of the members at the national and the local levels. For instance, one of the areas is the capacity building. There has been a lot of capacity building of the farmers through these national organizations and regional organizations. And also, there have been some instances of partnerships with financial institutions to be able to bring finance to the members of the farmers at the local level and at the regional level and at the national level. So we also see the attempts which to bring in and to focus on women and youth to make them to be more inclusive in the agricultural value chain process. So we also see that the advocacy level also is being increased. Now we are talking with the African Union to have a voice within the heads of government meetings, and we have a lot of interest by African Union to make us to be heard when they are having their meetings. And also we have mobilized a lot of resources with development partners such as IFAD, such as in fact we implemented a program, farmers organization for ACP countries, whereby we mobilized a lot of resources to develop the capacity of the farmers and also raise the level of their production and productivity all over Africa. So those are the measures that the organization has been doing to increase the productivity of farmers and also ensure food security in Africa.
Moving on, Dr. Babafemi, you highlighted the role of gender. And I think I want to pick this up because Andrea earlier had highlighted the perspective of gender impacts in your evaluations of WFP policy programs and interventions. Where do you see the intersection, Andrea, for ensuring inclusivity and equity in the food systems, where, for example, WFP is largely targeting areas of emergency and vulnerability?
As I noted, the significant proportion of the agricultural labor force and farmers in the continent are women. So for WFP, working to ensure that its interventions, whether this is food assistance or capacity strengthening or assets creation, that for WFP, the priority is ensuring that women and men have equitable access to those opportunities, and that programs and support is really directed effectively to support both women and men in the agricultural sector and in need of humanitarian assistance. We've done quite a lot of lesson learning. In fact, last year, WFP did a lesson learning piece looking at evaluations from WFP, also FAO and IFAD and CGIR, looking at what we've been learning for effective gender programming and where some of the challenges are. And we produced that short report as a contribution to the Food Systems Summit, which was held last year in 2021. And I'd say that the critical issue that we're learning from gender evaluations is we're moving on, we're improving. Attention to looking at gender distribution of access to programs and assets is there. We're seeing that coming through quite strongly. However, really looking at gender transformative change is the next sort of frontier for effective responses that really look at the women's empowerment dimension of the challenge. For WFP, one of the things we're doing in our evaluation work is through one of our impact evaluation evidence windows, which is looking at cash-based transfers and gender, is using impact evaluations to try to understand what elements make for effective programming to ensure that cash-based transfers are transformative for women, but also that they're delivered in a way that is also minimizing risks. So one of the issues we're looking at is what's happening within the household. Many evaluation activities stop by looking at what's happening at the household level, and research too, what's happening at the community level, what's happening in relation to agricultural production sort of dimensions, or looking at overall impacts of humanitarian assistance. But through this body of impact evaluations, we're really trying to understand also what's happening in relation to women's autonomy and agency for decisions within the household, because we see that women's power to make decisions at that level can have a big impact on how they're able to exert their role as agricultural producers and entrepreneurs within sort of food value chains is very important. So I just sort of highlight that as an area where we're investing in trying to understand more about what may work to start to unlock that transformational piece.
I think there was a specific question here to you, but if I could just take that, given particularly your experience with a long-standing experience with evaluation and your chair of the eval partners, zooming out from WFP's particular experience, what could you say more about the experiences you've seen of how the design of such programs to improve agricultural productivity, whether it's through the provision of aid transfers or it's actually through market-mediated efforts to improve agricultural productivity, where would you highlight as key lessons for the interface between evaluation and effective project design?
For WFP, we've done two big shifts in our evaluation function in recent years, and I'd say that's also being mirrored across the development and humanitarian sector. So the first one is a big investment in decentralized evaluation. So moving away from only having evaluations that are being commissioned by independent officers of evaluation to really having our country officers primarily identifying what their own learning and evidence agenda is and where they have gaps in knowledge and understanding, or where they need to demonstrate accountability to national partners. So we've seen a big increase since 2016 when we set up our decentralized evaluation function to these country-led evaluations, where the identification of the evaluation topic, the identification of the questions, the management of the evaluation, in using increasingly as well. I'll focus on Africa rather than globally, but increasingly working with African evaluators to do that work is providing a deep and rich understanding about what works and what doesn't. The other thing that we've been doing is increasingly doing evaluations jointly with national partners. So that will be with national governments in many cases, looking at the evaluation of a national school feeding program, for example, looking at the evaluation of a national sort of resilience policy. Those kind of evaluations, doing joint evaluations, including other international partners, looking at what makes effective gender programming, for example. So those joint evaluations, and increasingly we're being asked not just to be a partner in evaluation, but also to be supporting national governments and cooperating partners to be doing their own evaluations. So moving on to country-led evaluation of national priorities, policies and programs. And as I said, I'm giving you the examples from WFP, but this is something we're seeing right across the sector. And I think that's very, very powerful, because it's then really working at the national level to understand national learning priorities, working out what evidence is needed to inform replication and scale up of effective programs that work at that level. So that for me is one of the big investments that we've made, which I think is transforming the evaluation work we do and how it's used. The other investment we've made, again in WFP, but we're seeing is increasingly a tool that's being used across the development and now the humanitarian sector, is impact evaluation. So really using very rigorous counterfactual based approaches that really do enable us to identify what's working and why. And so we're gradually investing in WFP in using impact evaluations selectively to build strong evidence where we feel the evidence base is weak. So we've agreed corporate priorities that look at cash-based transfer and gender, which I referred to earlier, that look at nutrition programming, that look at school-based programs, and also are looking at climate change and resilience programs. And again, I think we're going to be seeing more of that coming through. It's an area that, again, in evaluation, we've seen tremendous growth and interest over the past decade. And that's something that we've in WFP, we've put an effort into putting into place. Again, our commitment is to be doing more of that work with national partners, particularly in Africa and Asia and Latin America, which is where the majority of WFP programs take place. So really working with national researchers to be able to deliver sort of, I suppose, more cutting edge evidence about what works.
Really comprehensive response, Andrea. And I see we have Dr. Babafemi is back. Nice to have you back. I think, Andrea, I mean, this is exactly the also scope, I believe, of our own evaluation team who are hosting this evaluation week. And if you look at the scope of the programming, it's clear that the direction that, there's a consistency in the direction you described for some of the, areas of priority that WFP has identified and regards evaluation, and what the bank's evaluation team is already doing. And of course, with the national states as our key clients, a big part of the programming is really at that national level, and of course with a range of our partners, and in support of our operational teams that really benefit from some of the evaluations of their own specific programs to improve the design. I see here we also have Martin Fregene again, who's changed his look. But I know that is Vincent Castell, who is sitting in for Martin. Thanks, Vincent, for joining us. Vincent is a manager in the Feed Africa team that focuses on the north and central regions. So, Vincent, I hope you've had a chance to listen in case there are any specific questions that come to you. But before that, Dr. Babafemi, before you had a bit of the network challenge. I don't know if you heard the question, but it was a question really still along the lines of the role that evaluation, monitoring, and learning play. And there was a question out here from the colleagues listening in, asking if you, as the CEO of such a large African organization of farmers with such a huge membership, what role do you see monitoring, evaluation, and learning playing for your farmers, your organization, particularly from the perspective of the objective to increase their productivity?
Yes. In terms of evaluation, for now, what we are doing, we are using the results of the evaluation that have been carried out by our partners on the various projects that we are implementing with them. And they always point out to us what are the areas that we are not meeting all the objectives of the projects and programs that we are implementing, and what should be done, and how it should be done. So what we normally do is we have our annual plans, action plans. So we feed in those evaluation results into our annual plans, so that we incorporate them, and we implement the new plan with the outcomes of the evaluation that our development partners that we implement the programs with give to us. That essentially is what we are doing. And but as I just came, and one of the things that I'm planning to do is a holistic evaluation of all our programs to see the synergies with the objectives of promoting the productivity of smallholder farmers across Africa, and also coming up with new initiatives on how we can now standardize and bring evaluation into the process of our developing our programs and our strategies. So that is what we are doing. We know that evaluation is very important because it gives you feedback on what you are doing, the programs you are implementing, the projects you are implementing, whether they are achieving the objectives that those programs and projects are being set up. And if not, then we can quickly make amends and be on the track. Whether the one again is to look at how strategy fit those programs are to our overall strategies, action plans, and the mission and vision of the organization, which incorporates the actions of the action plans of the national farmers organizations, the regional farmers organization, and we put everything together in the evaluation report to see whether the issue is at the national level or even at the local level or at the regional level, so that we know what kind of measures and the actions can be directed at rectifying whatever shortcomings that have been brought out through the evaluation. So evaluation is very important, and we take it very seriously in the organization.
So I think Vincent, this is a good place for me to bring you in, because I know, given your background as a researcher in the past, but also the vast experience you've had in developing large agricultural operations for the bank. What has been your experience as to kind of the value of some of the evaluations that have come out with respect to really contributing to improved operations and improved project design?
And for me, there are actually two evaluation cycles, and that makes us rethink the way we develop, prepare our operations, and there are quite different lessons to be learned. The first type is short-term short-term evaluations that enable us to see the mistakes we've made, because we want to quickly implement our operations and look at the impact. And the long-term evaluations usually undertaken by IDEV, and that harken back to decades. And we can look at the long-lasting effects of operations on as regards the improvement of conditions, and as far as other things are concerned. And I was referring to our research activities earlier on, as well as short-term actions and evaluation are concerned. As far as I'm concerned, they are very important aspects for the culture. One, or rather, in the agricultural sector, when we implement a project in the agricultural sector, if we miss agricultural season, our operations are going to be postponed by 6 months or even a full year. Therefore, the way our operation is developed, the quality of the development, given the quality of what we're going to do, and also given the timetable for the implementation of our operation, all this is quite important. And the quality, if if it's poor quality, this is going to result in very long delays. If we miss an agricultural campaign season, we're trying to improve on this, and we see it increasingly in the emergency facility that is being implemented. And the sequencing, a proper sequencing is what is going to help us catch up on agricultural season and have an impact. And all the lessons we draw from short-term evaluations or what I call short-term cycles is the involvement of various stakeholders need to prepare integrated agricultural projects. When we are developing this operation, we're going to engage, and this will result in great success. And this is specific to the agricultural sector as compared to other. If you need an integrated supply chain, you need a range of stakeholders, logistics, uh, sales, and sometimes exports. They are the factors that are of the essence during the preparation that will have um, an effect, a snowball effect on the operation. And we will, and if all the various actors, stakeholders are integrated, we're going to end up having a transformation that will be consumption, or we realize that during uh, setting up this value chain, the development impact is going to be so smaller than what was envisaged initially. And evaluation will help us draw a lot of lessons because these operations are quite complex to prepare. You learn quite a lot from one country to another. We have to learn from our mistakes and also apply these lessons in other countries. As regards to long-term cycles, there's still a lot to learn, and there are things that are cropping up over the last 15 years. This has made it possible to improve the relevance of these operations. For instance, medium-term cycles related to the use of natural resources and resilience to climate change. Initially, in some types of ecosystem, we didn't, as well as institution, for instance, no emphasis was laid on the type of crop and the matching between this crop and the ecosystem, and there is also the improved seeds under the TAT program. Well, how are these improved seeds going to turn up in 10, 15 years? And these medium-term cycles have helped us draw a lot of lessons, and there's been a lot of improvement at the bank now. We've got the TAT initiative, and I think that we have taken on board now resilience to climate change. The second lesson we have learned from medium-term actions is the momentum of stakeholders, institutional, how this momentum will change local organizations and also how natural resources were going to be used, and how these local organizations were supposed to take into consideration the living standards in Africa, and there's an urban drift in Africa. All this has changed, And it is of the essence to have a participatory approach with a long-term view as regards the types of resources and the future consumption pattern, whether you're talking about resources or crops, so that you have a better organization, uh, institutional organization, particularly as regards the African society. And finally, there is the involvement of the private sector that piggybacks on what I said earlier on. But this integrated local approach, and 20 years ago, we had in mind the public sector. Then we realized that from word go, even with public sector operations, we had to listen to the private sector, try to crowd in the private sector in order to support the development of value chains and also support this institutional and sociological development in the African continent.
You spanned the whole gamut of kind of important points that were also discussed earlier. And I think you ended off with a great segue from maybe the last set of questions that I would ask. And I think there are others also that the audience has asked. So I might bring them in. But Vincent touched upon the importance of the private sector and their role. And earlier when we started, it was clear that the AfDB's 10-year strategy and Feed Africa approach is really trying to enhance the role that private sector plays and really make the agri value chain a competitive and business-oriented value chain. And earlier, Andre, you also referenced the Food System Summit, Dr. Baba Femi. You talked about the Africa Green Resolution Forum earlier this year. And I think some of the principal lessons that were coming out of that, or the calls, is the importance of really increasing private sector investment, right, into the food system. So from that perspective, Andrea, it was really interesting to hear WFP, from a WFP perspective. You really start talking about the your concern and your interventions that really try to ensure that their market, that they help to enhance the market, rather than in the past where perhaps bringing in of external food and resources might have crowded in or crowded out localized production. Can you talk about a bit more WFP's shift in focus on the role that private sector partnerships and commercialization plays in terms of your agri-sector programming?
As I'm the director of evaluation, my deep learning on particular topics in the organization really comes from the evaluations that I worked on. And it's actually going to be in 2025 where we will be evaluating the WFP local food procurement policy. And that policy is really where the engagement with the value chains and how that sort of connects to the issues I talked about is for WFP, which is a major distributor of in-kind food assistance, really trying to work with local partners, with the private sector, with farmers and farmers associations to supply the goods, the food that is used through in-kind food assistance. And that includes increasingly specialized nutrition products that are used to deal with acute and moderate malnutrition. So one of the challenges for WFP that's sort of enshrined in that policy is, and we've seen this in recent evaluations in Central African Republic and South Sudan, for example, is that WFP is making big efforts to buy production locally from farmer organizations to stimulate local production. And WFP is a major player. We're talking about millions of tons of food that is used in Africa, but also in other humanitarian crises in Yemen, for example, Afghanistan, where a significant proportion of WFP assistance is going. But one of the things that we find is there are challenges. There are cost barriers. There are higher costs associated with local sort of procurement, as compared to, as we used to be able to do, buy in significant amounts of wheat and oil from Ukraine. So there are challenges around dealing with the differential sort of costs, but also there are challenges with quality of products. Clearly, for WFP, if it's using in-kind food assistance, really making sure that food products are safe is of critical importance. And again, these are challenges that can be resolved through building long-standing connections with farmer organizations, with agricultural extension services, working to deal with the access to inputs and credit. And for WFP, as I noted, the biggest returns on this kind of intervention really comes from working in close partnerships with the private sector, but also with the Rome-based agencies. And increasingly, WFP is working within partnerships with international finance organizations, the World Bank, looking at how it strengthens its collaboration as well with the African Development Bank to work with national governments and build capacities as well, particularly to deal with those enabling environment issues that Dr. Fregenet was talking about earlier on, that the enabling environment is really crucial. So that's really, as I said, I'll know a lot more personally about this in a couple of years when we do that sort of evaluation. But as I said, from gleaning from evaluation work that's being done largely at the decentralized level, those are some of the insights that are coming through.
I think even now, I mean, you mentioned, Andre, just the vast size of this procurement exercise. And earlier in the day, we had Dr. Fregenet talk about the Africa emergency food response that the bank has put in place of 1.2 billion. And this is also then a massive procurement effort. I wonder, Dr. Babafemi, your organization and your farmers, how do they interact with such large scale local procurement schemes? And do you see them as really boosting the opportunity for increased provision of a market for your farmers?
I think this is one area that we are seriously looking into as an organization, because we have not been very effective, for instance, in for the procurement of inputs for our members. We rely mostly on the government procurement system and distribution system to reach them. But we are trying to develop a strategy whereby with our development partners, we can procure some of these input directly and also distribute them to the members directly. whereby now we'll be able to understand and know, because government procurement system is not efficient. It's highly political, and most of the time the inputs do not reach the right people that should have them. So that is why we are developing the strategy of how we can either through government support or through private sector support mobilize resources and procure these inputs directly by ourselves and distribute them to our members. So, and I think there are a lot of opportunities in the procurement in procuring those inputs for our members, which we are still not effective at doing right now. Thank you, Adam.
I would like to ask each of the panelists just very quickly, maybe your final parting shot in a minute. When we talk about the lessons on hand for maximizing agricultural productivity of Feed Africa, what would you say in the context of evaluation and agricultural productivity is the key lesson that we should need to keep in mind for the transformation of agriculture that we seek? So I'll let you keep your response in mind. But I would like to ask, I was trying to look at and draw from some of the questions from our audience, but some of the French questions I don't think were, I could have done them justice. So I'm going to ask my colleague Najade, who was looking at some of the French questions. Is there any, Najade, that you feel should be brought to the panel before we close?
There was a rather general question about Central Africa. This is for our colleagues from the bank that was saying, I noticed that few initiatives have been made for Central Africa. What strategy has the bank put in place for Central Africa? I think that was one of the French questions that I translated into English, if I'm not wrong.
Right. Thanks for that, Najade. Then I think that's a well-targeted question, because we have Vincent here who manages also, I believe, along with North Central. So maybe Vincent, as I'll turn over to you to maybe respond to that, but also just to finish us off with your quick parting shot, as I'll then turn to Andrea and Dr. Babafemi.
Just to give some pointers on what we do, and agriculture and the agro-industry in general is one of our pillars of interventions in the Central African region. And here there is first the issue that we try to address is the issue of production and productivity for all commodities. If we look at productivity ratios in the Central African region, they are well below what could be achieved according to the agro-ecosystems that is here at stake. And especially in the more rainy areas of, I would say, the Central African region. So here comes, when it comes to production and productivity, access to fertilizer, access to improved seeds, and all these, the farmers have difficulties in accessing these improved inputs, and this is what we are working on. The second issue issue in the region relates to some of the local production systems that need to be boosted, and the crisis that we have that the region has been facing now, in terms of accessing wheat on the global markets, was, I think, a wake-up call in a number of instances. The promotion, for example, of cassava wheat as a way to substitute, cassava flour, as a mean to substitute wheat, for example, for the production of bread, is now promoted in the region, and the bank is here supported this type of initiative. Then there is the issue of supporting the development of the value chains and the private sector. And here it becomes extremely, I would say, ambitious, and we need to have concerted effort on a number of, I would say, elements, because it does not only relate to the agri-production systems, but also in terms of the developments of feeder roads, logistics, agro-processing zones, better connecting the production areas to the consumption centers. All these aspects, we try now to develop some sort of an integrated approach in a number of countries. This is what we are currently, for example, discussing with DRC at a very large scale, so that the production centers where actual production opportunities are vast, are basically being exploited to ensure food security in the country, but also to provide a potential source of exports for the country. And finally, what is also at stake is the sustainability of what we are doing in the Central African region, because this is home of the Congo basin forest, and which is an ecosystem of global importance. So this is also something that we are working on with the countries to make sure that while we develop agriculture at the same time, we do not jeopardize the sustainability of the agro-ecosystem. So we are also working with the authorities to make sure that when we develop this, we at the same time develop agroforestry, we develop sustainable way of protecting the existing national parks, protecting the buffer zone, and at the same time providing livelihoods to those who are living in the vicinity of these very fragile ecosystem. I hope, Andrew, I responded to the question.
Yes, you did. Spot on. And not only that, I think you wrapped it up quite well from your end. So thanks so much for that, Vincent. I think, Andre, if I can turn to you for your final parting shot.
I think if I may, I'll say two very, very briefly. The first, and it's not surprising coming from where I come, is the importance of really investing in evidence and learning, and particularly so we ensure effective understanding of what's working, where and why, and that we can easily inform replication and scale up. Because there are many amazing things that are being done in Africa. The issue is we're not sort of picking it up quickly enough, and we're not understanding the factors that make something work. So we really need to get better at that and faster at that, so we can really inform effective replication and scale up. And we need to join up the dots and bring together bodies of evidence from across organizations. Too often the evidence is sitting within organization. It is not being shared and accessed adequately. We're not making best use of it and being able to understand what works and why in a more confident way. So that's my first lesson that we need to pay attention to. The other one is more forward-looking. We know we're in a world of increasing climate shocks, and I think it's important that we set out a clear, forward-looking evidence and learning agenda. So we're starting to really understand how we build resilience to those shocks, and also really looking at how we put in place mechanisms to address climate change in agricultural and food systems across the continent. And we need to do that thinking together, so we have a clear shared learning agenda to enable us to move fast, because we really have to do so.
Dr. Babafemi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrew. First, I want to mention that PAFO in Central Africa, we have a regional office in Cameroon, and which is coordinating all the activities of the farmers organization at the national and local levels in that region. And they have been doing a lot of work in building capacity of farmers in good agricultural practices, and also trying to mobilize finance for microfinance institutions for the farmers organizations. And also they have been effective in trying to organize better the sector, so that they will be in the position to benefit from the support of the development partners and donors. As we have been discussing, evaluation is very critical, it's very important, because it's what gives us the feedback on the various projects and the programs that we're implementing, and what are the effects and what are the shortcomings. And it is what gives us also input into the design of future projects and programs, so that we try as much as possible to avoid the mistakes that we made in the previous implementation, and ensure a better and improved programs and projects that will be to the benefit of the members of the organization. So we, in as much as we depend on our development partners for evaluation, we are now building the capacity for self-evaluation and also the evaluation of our programs and projects. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Babafemi, and thank you all who are in the audience and listening. After 2 hours, we still have over 100 participants. So really want to appreciate all the panelists for your contribution. Vincent, you came in and hit the ground running. Thanks so much for providing that really comprehensive perspective of the value of evaluations, lessons and impact from the point of view of the bank, both with regard to sovereign and also private sector projects. I think highlighting the importance of both quick short-term evaluations that allow for mid-cost adjustments in the programming to ensure impact, and also broader, longer-term investments that really guide, as Andrea has also mentioned, a kind of forward-looking design, and particularly now in the context of climate change, a lot of variation, the importance of ensuring sustainability and building resilience in our agricultural food systems. I think, as Andrea said, evaluation becomes more and more important. And so I think Dr. Babafemi ended it off spot on with regards to the importance of building that capability for evaluation insight across all key stakeholders, including the most important stakeholder of all when it comes to agricultural productivity, which has been the key sectoral theme of this session, our farmers. So I want to thank you all really for your contributions. I want to thank the team at IDEV for setting up this session and bringing such interesting panelists on board, and more generally for the evaluation week. So I'd like to thank you all, colleagues, and wishing the evaluation team, the best in the ongoing sessions for the evaluation week. Thank you all.